Hello and welcome to The Inquisitive Crafter. I'm Katrina from Crafty Jacks, and today I'm sharing with you a little bit about my adventures in Scotland. So if you've been following me on Instagram or you have our newsletter delivered to your inbox, you'll know that my family and I spent 5 weeks in Scotland, starting at the end of April until the end of May. And we saw and did so much. It was an amazing time, and I'm so grateful that I was able to spend that time with my family and share those experiences with my kids. And a couple of the highlights for me were doing things that were wool centered. And so I thought I'd share some of those treasures that I found and a little bit about those companies. So the first up is Uist Wool. So Uist Wool has been around since 2013, and they are a small mill in North Uist in the Outer Hebrides, and they are committed to using fleece from the local farmers and processing it at their mill and creating beautiful, beautiful natural colored wool. And so I have 3 skeins that I picked up that I plan to weave with. When I was in their shop in Uist, they had fabric that had been woven by Harris Tweed weavers, so it was Uist Wool and Harris Tweed woven, and so they had these beautiful bags in some of the natural shades that they have, and so I thought it would be really fun to weave my own cloth and incorporate a little bit of my own history into it. And so these are the colors that I chose. And so this one is Cheviot and Hebredian mixed together. This dark one is 100% Hebredian, I believe. Yes, this is entirely Hebredian. And then this one is Textiles, Wartles, and mixed breeds. So it's a combination. And they're all sheep that are raised in the Outer Hebrides. So the Outer Hebrides is comprised of Barra, and then Benbecula, which is the Uists, and it sort of goes from Eriskay up to North Uist, and then across the sound you have Harris and Lewis. So Harris and Lewis, it's funny, it's one island, but it has 2 names because Harris is separated from Lewis by a mountain range. And so that is sort of the Outer Hebrides, and all of this wool for Uist Wool comes from the Outer Hebrides, primarily in the Uist chains of the Outer Hebrides, but that is where their wool comes from. So it's all locally sourced, locally cared for, and it's given a real rise to that cottage industry on a really otherwise very small, very tiny island. And then I went to Harris and Lewis, and of course that is home to Harris Tweed. So Harris Tweed has been around since sort of the 1830s, and originally it was called Harris Twill, and because all of the Harris Tweed was originally woven as twill, and they figured that the way that the tweed became named is because one of the merchants made a mistake, and that is where we now have Harris Tweed. Now, I had the opportunity to stop by one of the mills. So there's several different mills on the island. I believe there's 3 main ones. And we happened to pop into one that does tours. And we hadn't booked ahead, but we were lucky enough to arrive on a Friday where there were only 2 guys working. And one of them said, yeah, come on in, I'll give you a brief little tour. So I got a private little tour of one of the Harris Tweed mills. And so for Harris Tweed, again, they're sourcing all their fleece comes from the Outer Hebrides. So again, from Barra right up to Lewis, along that chain of the Outer Hebrides, that's where their wool comes from. It is all processed in these 3 mills in Lewis and Harris. And those mills wash those fleeces, card those fleeces, dye those fleeces, mix the colors together to produce their tweed yarns, and it's just a really fascinating process. So at the mills, that is where the yarn is produced. And then all of the fabric itself is woven by the crofters in their homes. And so often they'll have like a little loom shed outside or a room in their house that is dedicated to the Harris Tweed loom. So there are 2 different types of weavers for Harris Tweed. You have mill weavers, and they receive beamed warps from the mill with instructions on how that is supposed to be woven, and then they are paid for their service. And you have other weavers that will go and they're more private weavers, and they will go and they will purchase the yarn, and some of it will be stamped at the mill and then given back to them. But all of the tweed that is woven in the crofters' homes eventually comes back to the mill to be washed and finished and stamped. And as long as it meets the quality controls that they have in place, it will be sold as Harris Tweed. And so some of it goes to the mills and some of it goes back to the crofters for them to sell independently. And so it's such an interesting industry in that they have helped to create an industry on an otherwise very isolated island, and it became really popular sort of in the late 18th century when one of the people who took it over, it had been inherited down, and for the life of me I can't think of her name at the moment, but she started seeing a real market to be able to market it to the fashion industry. And now Harris Tweed is known as one of the best tweeds out there, or the best tweed out there. And it is really marketed as a sustainable product. And the wool is, because of the care for the animals, the wool is naturally water resistant, and it's just such a durable, warm fabric. And the reason that it started is that the crofters needed something to keep their families warm in the climate that is the Outer Hebrides. We were really lucky that while we were there we had beautiful weather, but we definitely had a couple of storms come through that you could see where a nice wool jacket that would keep you warm and dry would be really, really handy. And so I picked up most of my tweed from the Harris Tweed store in Stornoway. And so I got a couple of half-meter ones. And the lovely thing is that when you purchase a certain yardage of fabric from the Harris Tweed shops, you also get the official Harris Tweed labels to go with it. And then I also purchased some remnants to go with it. And I have plans to make some pillows for our home and do a little bit of embroidery work on those pillows to sort of tell the story of our trip. So I'm really looking forward to making something out of these and incorporating this beautiful tweed into our home. Now, when we were in Uist as well, I got the opportunity to go to one of the independent weavers and see what they were creating. And so I have a little bit of tweed from Sisters Tweed. And so she does a little bit of mill weaving, but she also does some independent weaving. And so this is some of their own weaving. And it's really fascinating to watch the weavers work on these looms because they have been partially mechanized. And these Hattersley looms are usually run by like a bicycle type mechanism, which throws the fly shuttle back and forth, creating cloth in a really, really quick, fast manner. And so some of these weavers are producing cloth for the mill at an astounding rate. And there's literally thousands upon thousands of meters of cloth produced in the Outer Hebrides every year. And it is spectacular cloth. So if you ever get the opportunity to go, I definitely recommend seeing that. And then while we were in the Hebrides, I've been following the Hebredian Baker for a really long time. And if you know me in person, you know that I love to bake and I love to share. One of my love languages is food, I guess you could say. And I was so excited to find one of his books in one of the shops that we stopped in the Hebrides and pick up that book for myself. And I'm very excited to cook some of the recipes in there and have that part of Scotland for us here in Canada. And also while I was on Uist, we went into a little bookshop on Stornoway, and I found this book, and it's The Art of Needlecraft. And it's dressmaking, embroidery, curtains, tapestry, knitting and crochet, rug making, weaving, basketry, raffia work, leather work, stenciling, boutiques, and new ideas. And there isn't actually a published date in this book, but you can see by the front cover it is very old paper, and I've flipped through it a little bit and seen some of the examples of the embroidery and things like that in this book, but I found this book in a used bookshop for £1, so it had to come home with me, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if there's stuff that I can take from this book and incorporate into my life now. And then last but not least, one of the other places that we went to was Orkney, and those islands are sort of on the northwest side of Scotland, of the mainland, and they're comprised of several different islands, and you can get to them by ferry or by plane. And I didn't make it out to North Ronaldsay, but North Ronaldsay has some famous sheep because they have seaweed eating sheep. And so these sheep survive on seaweed, and that's what they eat, and that's what their diet is. But I did find some North Ronaldsay wool that has been processed again in Orkney, and it's been, so it says hand-clipped organic wool from Orkney's seaweed-eating sheep. And so these are produced in Orkney and dyed in Orkney, and so I'm going to actually incorporate these in with my Uist wool and weave some fabric for myself, and then probably make a project bag or something like that. And so that's a little bit about some of the wool adventures that I got up to while I was in Scotland. And if you ever get a chance to visit, I would definitely recommend checking out some of those places and seeing what these places are like, and really experiencing a different type of lifestyle. So yeah, that's it for today. Just a little bit about Scotland, a little bit about Harris Tweed and Uist Wool and the lovely seaweed eating sheep from Orkney. And thank you so much for joining me. If you have questions that you would like me to answer in one of our tutorial videos, please send them to ask@craftyjacks.ca, and I'll do my very best to do that for you. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye for now.